Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, November 25th, 2016, the day after Thanksgiving. We are, of course, still off and making merry, but I did not want to leave you for the end of the week without some new material, catching up on some of the many stories we still have waiting in the wings. We've got a couple of great ones for you that I'd like to share with you. I know you might have been able to use some of them at Thanksgiving dinner. And this will just be one of those many situations I think we've all experienced where we say, you know, the head slap. Ow. That was too hard. All right. Sound effects next time. I'll grab that recording for next time. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm awake now. Anyway, there's always been those times where you think of that fantastic comeback or that one extra example you wanted to cite just a few minutes after it's too late, maybe the next day even. I feel that way almost all the time, trying to get these stories in edgewise, but that's why I am so thankful every day that the after show bats clean up for us. There's always something that we absolutely positively meant to get to that we just didn't get around to, couldn't fit in. The 2-hour window, it's just too small. We got to go 24/7 here on the Kagro in the Morning Show. So, it's Friday. We still have house guests. The kids want to go see a movie. People want to go out to breakfast. Didn't want to leave you on your own, though. Among the many blockbusters and explainers that I've got to share with you for the rest of the week, and I guess for the next for the foreseeable future during the Trump presidency, and so at random I've chosen this one, but I think this one kicks things off nicely. It's his piece dated November 23rd by Brian Beutler and entitled, "This Single Concept Explains Trump's Many Outrages." And it's hard to get it down to one, I guess, but it's a pretty broad concept here that Brian latches onto. Subheader, "When the president does it, that means it's not illegal, even if he has no idea what he's doing." You ready for this one? This, of course, published in the New Republic, where Brian writes, "Currently, Donald Trump, it has been observed, presents his opponents with many targets, making it difficult for them to focus public imagination on any specific disqualifying outrage. It has also been observed that Trump benefits, intentionally or otherwise, from diversion, such as when he picked a Twitter fight with the cast of Hamilton, just as evidence he's using his president-elect power to personally enrich himself began bubbling to the surface. Even absent diversion, it can be difficult to characterize the information we learn about Trump in consistent ways. Is he a vindictive power addict? Is he irredeemably corrupt? Does he demonstrate Jacques Clouseau-like unfitness for the presidency? The answer to all these questions is yes, but separating them out in this way to categorize different misdeeds creates cognitive dissonance. Scheming madmen aren't typically heedless bumblers, and vice versa. What's needed is a single conceptual lens through which to view all of Trump's antics, whether they seem evil or dangerous or confused, and the one concept that encompasses all of them is impunity. Through luck and graft and privilege, Trump has gotten away with an incredible amount of chicanery in his life, to put it mildly. If people behave ethically, whether out of genuine moral uprightness or the pragmatic desire to escape punishment, they exhibit self-control and an awareness of and respect for the rules. If people don't particularly care about these things, they risk catastrophic consequences. But higher up the income scale, it becomes easier to escape penalty, and more tempting to let ethics slip further. Nothing could be more dangerous, of course. Impunity serves as a magnet for bad people and erodes the mental habits that make decent but flawed individuals behave ethically. It serves as a breeding ground for vice. I sound like I'm lecturing you, but Brian's doing it. Trump has inhabited such an environment his entire life. Having suffered no serious repercussions for any of his misdeeds, it is unsurprising that he gives little thought to how his actions affect other people. We can explain all of Trump's transgressions with this single formative fact. And the most alarming thing about it is the way his air of impunity allows attendant failures, greed, incompetence, cruelty, to feed upon one another. On Tuesday alone, Trump demonstrated the wide scope of danger his impunity poses to the country. That would be Tuesday the 22nd, this past Tuesday, not just the Election Day Tuesday. First, in separate statements to the press, Trump and his campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, explained that he has lost his zest for prosecuting Hillary Clinton. I don't want to hurt the Clintons, I really don't, Trump told the New York Times reporters and editors. She went through a lot and suffered greatly in many different ways. It should go without saying that it's bad for a presidential candidate to threaten to prosecute his opponent, because due process is an essential right that protects innocent people from tyrants. It should also go without saying that it's bad for a president-elect to boast about sparing someone from prosecution, because in doing so he's claiming an illegitimate dominion over the power to determine who does and does not get prosecuted. But it's also important to recall that this question arises only because Trump decided it would be fruitful to campaign against Clinton by calling her a criminal, encouraging mobs of people to chant for her imprisonment, and tossing off a promise that under his presidency she'd, quote, be in jail. Trump faces questions about Clinton today because he campaigned for president recklessly and is now pocketing the implication that as president he will dictate whom the Justice Department targets as a kind of dividend. At the same meeting with the Times, Trump didn't attempt to spin away concerns that he would use the presidency to enrich himself. To the contrary, he admitted he pressed the leader of a foreign political party to oppose offshore wind farms because he's worried about their effect on the view from one of his seaside golf courses. He boasted that his victory earlier this month probably increased the value of his new Washington, D.C. hotel. He hinted he might exploit presidential exemptions to federal corruption laws in the same way he's exploited tax loopholes that likely erased his income tax liability for years and years. All of this is consistent with how he conducted himself when he had no obvious conflicts of interest. It's also the logical outgrowth of the haphazard campaign he ran, with wanton disregard for the kind of norms, like disclosing tax returns and promising to liquidate holdings, that have bound past candidates or discouraged them from seeking office in the first place. He may not have expected to win precisely because he took these liberties, but winning unexpectedly reinforces the impermeable bubble of impunity in which he operates. If Trump seems to be winging it through the early days of the transition, unperturbed by the potential for horror, this is why. He can't, or makes no effort to, distinguish between bumbling and purposefulness, ethics and corruption, normal and abnormal behavior, because these distinctions have never been a lasting source of value to him. Trump's meeting with the New York Times nearly didn't happen when at the last minute he claimed to have received word that the Times had changed the, quote, terms and conditions agreed upon in advance. And here we have embedded his quote, or his tweet to that effect. I canceled today's meetings with the failed New York Times when the terms and conditions of the meeting were changed at the last moment. Not nice, he tweets like a child. After the situation had been resolved and the roundtable was back on, the Times got to the bottom of what really caused Trump to lash out. 3 people with knowledge of Mr. Trump's initial decision to cancel the meeting said that Reince Priebus, the incoming White House chief of staff, had been among those urging the president-elect to cancel it because he would face questions he might not be prepared to answer, the newspaper reported. He's not prepared to answer any questions, of course, so good guess. It was Mr. Priebus who relayed to Mr. Trump, erroneously, or perhaps purposefully incorrectly, that the Times had changed the conditions of the meeting, believing it would result in a cancellation, these people said. Perhaps this reflects a concerted effort within the Trump Brain Trust to undermine Priebus. That would be a big story for different reasons. But what the Times sources describe resembles tactics other advisors have used to control Trump in the past. Taking them at their word, we see exactly how Trump, bringing an untouchable sense of self-regard into the Oval Office, could lead to tragedy. A chief of staff with no experience in government, manipulating a president who has no idea what he's doing, resulting in an impulsive, damaging outburst for which nobody's held accountable. This presidency is shaping up to be defined by a single maxim, that when the president does it, that means it's not illegal, even if he had no idea what he was doing in the first place. So that gives us an interesting entree to a number of different stories. One that came to mind while I was in the middle of reading it, but let me add this one first for background. Armando mentioned it the other day, and we discussed it a little bit, but we didn't read the entire article, and we don't necessarily need to, but I think this is actually probably pretty good background for understanding a few other items I want to add to the impunity pile. I think that was a great place to start. The New York Times piece from, also dated, I guess, the 23rd, from Adam Liptak, although it was a date, I guess I feel like it was published a day or two earlier than that because, and as a matter of fact, it's dated November 21st. I was looking at it in the pocket view. I knew it was a few days older than that. This is Donald Trump's business dealings test a constitutional limit. This was about the emoluments clause, or at least in part about that. But Armando brought it to our attention. In scanning it, I see a number of places where points are raised, which will help us connect some more dots. So perhaps we just ought to comb through the whole thing. Not long after he took office, it begins, President Obama sought advice from the Justice Department about a potential conflict of interest involving a foreign government. He wanted to know whether he could accept the Nobel Peace Prize. The answer turned on the emoluments clause, an obscure provision of the Constitution that now poses risks for President-elect Donald J. Trump should he continue to reap benefits from transactions with companies controlled by foreign governments. And obviously he will. Emolument means compensation for labor or services, and the clause says that, quote, no person holding any office of profit or trust shall accept any present emolument, office, or title, or of any kind whatsoever, or whatever, as they put it, from any king, prince, or foreign state, unless Congress consents. It took David J. Barron, a Justice Department official who is now a federal appeals court judge in Boston, 13 single-spaced pages to answer Mr. Obama's question. These are nuanced questions. Can I accept the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, 13 pages to deal with that. Two things were clear, he wrote. The emoluments clause surely applied to the president, and the prize, which included a check for about $1.4 million, was the sort of thing that would be barred if it came from a foreign state. In the end, however, Mr. Barron concluded that Mr. Obama could accept the prize because the committee that chose him was independent of the Norwegian government, and the prize itself was privately financed. But he said that the answer would be different if a foreign government sought to make a payment to a sitting president. In a footnote, Mr. Barron added, corporations owned or controlled by a foreign government are presumptively foreign states under the emoluments clause. That quickly becomes apparent interest. If they hadn't brought it up next, I don't know what else they would have said, but I certainly would have. I think you probably have already guessed where that's going. Mr. Trump's companies do business with entities controlled by foreign governments and people with ties to them. The ventures include multi-million-dollar real estate arrangements with Mr. Trump's companies either as a full owner or a branding partner in Ireland and Uruguay. The Bank of China is a tenant in Trump Tower, did you know that? And a lender for another building in Midtown Manhattan where Mr. Trump has a significant partnership interest. He owes money, of course, to the Bank of China. The Bank of China is a state-owned bank. And P.S., other gigantic conflict, a tenant in Trump Tower. He's already, forget the loan. As a tenant in Trump Tower, he's pocketing money paid to him by a state entity, a foreign state entity. Are we digging too far down? He would, of course, say that's just crap. It's just rent. But it is what it is. Experts in legal ethics say those kinds of arrangements could easily run afoul of the emoluments clause if they continue after Mr. Trump takes office. By the way, let me pause to say something here that I don't see mentioned, at least so far in the article, but connecting dots to some of our own discussions in the past here on the show. What about when he sells condo units in Trump towers around the world to Saudi royalty, who are pretty literally tied up in the same person is an individual and the state, all in one? What do we make of that? All right. Well, we'll leave that for further consideration, but you ponder it while we read the rest of this. As I said, experts in legal ethics say those kinds of arrangements could easily run afoul of the emoluments clause if they continue after Mr. Trump takes office. And, of course, he told the New York Times the following day that they would. The founders very clearly intended that the officers of the United States, including the president, not accept presents from foreign sovereigns, said Norman Eisen, who was the chief White House ethics lawyer for Mr. Obama from 2009 to 2011. Whenever Mr. Trump receives anything from a foreign sovereign, to the extent that it's not an arm's-length transaction, Mr. Eisen said, every dollar in excess that they pay over the fair market price will be a dollar paid in violation of the emoluments clause and will be a present to Mr. Trump. The Supreme Court has never squarely considered the scope of the clause, and there are no historical analogies to help understand how it should apply to a president who owns a sprawling international business empire. Earlier presidents worked hard to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest involving a foreign power, said Zephyr Teachout. How did she make it into this article? A law professor at Fordham who ran for Congress in New York this year as a Democrat and lost. The reason we don't have a lot of precedent here is that presidents in the past have gone out of their way to avoid getting even close to the emoluments clause, she said. Because it was, at the time, of course, of the framing, it would have been a complete outrage because it was a familiar practice for foreign sovereigns. Princes and kings were actually heads of government as well as heads of state, and frequently did exactly that. But I guess we've forgotten about that largely, and we've forgotten about the strange mix of different forms of states that we deal with, etc. Saudi Arabia is still chief in mind here, but certainly China and their Bank of China, it's got to be up there as well. But if Mr. Trump takes a different approach, it is not clear that anyone would have standing to challenge him in court. That's what he's hoping for. There are a lot of very smart lawyers turning that question over in their minds today, Mr. Eisen said, adding that a business competitor injured by foreign favoritism toward a Trump company might have standing. But Richard W. Painter, who was the chief White House ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush from 2005 to 2007, said such a business most likely would not have standing to sue. It's not there to protect the competitor, he said of the clause. It's there to protect the United States government. Good point. The way to address violations of the clause, Mr. Painter said, is not a lawsuit, but impeachment. And he's probably right. Lawmakers could take steps short of impeachment, particularly because the clause itself describes a role for Congress, which can give its consent to payments that would otherwise be barred. Mr. Painter said Congress should embrace that role by passing a resolution directed at Mr. Trump. I have no idea what he advocates it say, but, well, let's continue on. It should send a clear message to him that he should divest his assets and that they will regard dealings with his companies that he owns abroad and any entities owned by foreign governments as a potential violation of the emoluments clause unless he can prove it was an arm's-length transaction, he said. And does everybody understand the concept of the arm's-length transaction? But it's basically sort of a free market valuation type thing. And in other words, that it wouldn't necessarily represent an emolument in violation of the clause in any respect if the king of Saudi Arabia were to stay in a Trump resort hotel somewhere and take the penthouse and pay the going rate for the use of the penthouse. That or any sort of exchange. In other words, The arm's length being, look, setting aside the fact that Trump is the president of the United States, he's also the owner of this hotel, let's say. And if he were to say, hey, I offer this penthouse to any and all comers for $10,000 a night. And the king of Saudi Arabia said, I'm going to stay there. $10,000, here you go. And he stays. That's still, relatively speaking, in a normal situation, an arm's length transaction. It's where it becomes things like, I'll tell you what, you owe me $10,000. Why don't you, or worse, you owe me $100,000. Why don't you stay this week in one of my hotels, and I'll charge you $100,000 for it. We'll boost the price a little bit, whatever. And then the money comes to me, essentially, and you stay there 5-6 days, whatever. What do you care? You owe me the $100,000 anyway. If you change the pricing, or if you make it possible for people to funnel you money, or you say, if the king of Saudi Arabia had plans to travel to New York but was going to stay in the Ritz-Carlton, and instead is convinced, instead convinced to stay in a Trump hotel so that he can curry favor with the president, and he just switches his hotel, even if he pays fair market value for it and no more, it's still not an arm's length transaction. It's not what he was going to do on his own, having fairly viewed the landscape of the market and made his selection. He got strong-armed into taking or sweet talked, perhaps, into taking the room at the Trump facility instead. You see? Anyway, just to give you a rough idea of kind of what we're talking about and what we're looking for. Professor Teachout agreed that Congress had an constitutional obligation. She said both of those words. That's not a correction. An institutional, constitutional obligation to make sure that Trump isn't violating this clause. You would think the responsible action, Republican, Democrat, whatever, she said, would be for Congress to say, we want to make sure that there isn't a violation of this clause, and in order to do so, we need to look at the transactions to make sure they're fair market transactions instead of gifts. Not everyone agrees that the clause covers the president, though. Seth Barrett Tillman, a lecturer at the Maynooth University Department of Law in Ireland, noted that a different clause of the Constitution, which makes bribery an impeachable offense, specifically mentions the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States. The different language in the emoluments clause, along with historical evidence, he said, indicates that it does not apply to the President. That isn't to say we shouldn't be concerned as a policy matter with Trump, Mr. Tillman said. I just want to see the conversation moved away from constitutionalizing what should be an argument about good governance. That's an interesting one. Though, again, it seems to me, what is the language that they quote up top on the emoluments clause? I should have it open to that clause anyway, but it basically, I think it's pretty broad, right? No person holding any office of profit or trust. Now, the fact that they didn't name the president or vice president, they didn't name the vice president, does not apply to the vice president. They didn't name Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Does it not apply to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? I don't think anybody would argue that. Any office of profit or trust. Any. I understand that elsewhere where they took the time to name people in the bribery clause, would we argue that officials not named in the bribery clause aren't subject to bribery laws or impeachment because of bribery? If you bribed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that's okay because he's not named. I don't know. I understand what he's doing, covering all the bases. I don't know if I would buy that as an argument, but okay. Well, as he says, that's not to say we shouldn't be concerned with it as a policy matter. Lawrence Tribe, law professor at Harvard, said that he found Mr. Tillman's argument singularly unpersuasive and that it would pose grave danger to the Republic, especially in the case of a president with extensive global holdings that he seems bent on having his own children manage even after he assumes office. In 2011, Jay Wexler, a law professor at Boston University, published The Odd Clauses, a book about the Constitution's more obscure provisions. He said such obscurity could be impermanent, as recent attention to the Emoluments Clause demonstrates. I've seen over and over how parts of the Constitution that were considered vestigial or irrelevant for decades or more can suddenly resurface and take on enormous importance with a quick change of events, Professor Wexler said. The framers were prescient men who created a government that could withstand the worst of human foibles, corruption, vindictiveness, the thirst for tyranny, and wrote a constitution to combat those foibles in many of their forms, not all of which will always be present, but which emerge in different guises in different eras, he said. And, to borrow a phrase again, so ends the article. Very interesting, also in context with the Beutler piece and with, all sorts of other bits and pieces about the weirdness of Donald Trump and his business dealings. Let's see. I won't return at the moment to the story about how Steve Bannon got paid, though I suspect there will be a lot of parallels in that story. But instead, I will turn to some stories about some foreign entanglements. We'll call that a good segue over to the foreign entanglement story. I mentioned the other day that I brought up the Argentina story, and that Kate Sherrill had sent to us some interesting information from a tweet storm from someone with whom I wasn't familiar, but seemed to have pretty good insight into what was going on in Argentina. And if I have that still available to me, we'll take a quick look. And so I got some additional information about the person behind the tweet storm that I thought I would share with you. And let me see if I can't pull that one up. But there was, there we are. Susan Simpson was the name. You'll recall that the tweet storm was about how there was so much more behind the scenes on the Trump Tower plans for Argentina and the phone call with the Argentine president. And so that does appear to be the case. And, let's see. What else did Kate Sherrill send me about this? Here's some background she told me on Susan Simpson from the Argentina deal tweet storm, and a link to her blog. She came onto my radar, Kate says, because she was instrumental in the overturning of the murder conviction of Adnan Syed in Baltimore. She is now advocating for Joey Watkins in Georgia. The too long didn't read background here. Susan works in international law, specializing in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And in her free time, like as a hobby, she does investigations to get murder convictions overturned. I hope that would be, I guess if they're overturned, they were bad murder convictions, right? But, okay, well, we trust her to do the right thing. Her blog, by the way, is View from LL2, like Lower Lobby 2, a subterranean room, as it happens in the law library that she's talking about. I read the About section. View from LL2.com. Sounds like a very interesting person. And in tweeting about her latest tweet storms, I found that there were a few fans of both my podcast, this one here that you're listening to, Kagro in the Morning. Hi, how you doing? And her own podcast. Didn't know she did one. So there were some people who were pleasantly surprised by the intersection. Now, that all having been said, I'm going to turn away from Susan's writing herself and turn instead to Think Progress, where Alice Miranda Olstein has put together a very interesting report. And Armando, maybe you'll want to start tracking some of this stuff down too. It seems that, the title of her piece for Think Progress, there is a lot more to the Trump Argentina story, and the subheader explains why we might not be hearing all of it and why Armando might be able to dig up more of it. Foreign press reports, available only in Spanish, reveal a tangled web of family, business, and power. And wow, what a web. Wow, those are some families. I read it thinking, usually Think Progress is kind of sedate in the way they state things and sometimes understated even, and I'm looking for more, more punch from their headlines and their writing. But this is something I haven't heard before. I imagine that Susan Simpson's familiar with it, but it surprised me. Let's just start at the beginning here, because where the hell else would I start? Like other international leaders who were blindly dialing into Trump Tower following Donald Trump's upset victory. You remember that story? Argentinian President Mauricio Macri had no idea how to contact the new president-elect of the United States. Although now, having read some of this stuff, I don't know if I believe that or not, but maybe he doesn't have a current number for him. Okay. Why do I say that? Well, you'll hear. Macri asked his entire cabinet if anyone knew someone who could urgently connect him with the soon-to-be head of state. They would have plenty to discuss. Macri was reportedly quite anxious to talk to Trump to ensure the cooperation that existed under President Obama on intelligence sharing, combating drug trafficking, scientific research, and other areas would continue. The two men, both heirs to real estate fortunes before entering politics, also have a decades-long history of personal and professional tension. Oh, what? How do you mean? But hold on. There's more. But the future U.S. president wasn't an easy man to reach. Trump rejected the State Department's help in fielding calls from around the world and instead chose to wing it on unsecured phone lines. I do believe we made some mention of that in passing, but perhaps it was only online and Twitter. Yeah, when he rejected State Department help and just said, yeah, whoever can reach my cell phone, I'll have a chat with. Yeah, after, of course, insisting that Hillary Clinton had to go to jail because she was unusually reckless or careless with sensitive, confidential, or even classified information, he's going to now have his initial discussions with world leaders on unsecured phone lines. And by the way, I would mention to you that there's probably a lot of profit for those of you willing to risk it. Those cell phone calls, I think, still, for the most part, interceptable with police scanners and scanning equipment and the like. And so you might want to listen in on some of those things just for some good stock tips. I don't recommend it. Depending on what jurisdiction you're in, it may be illegal on its face, but hey, it's possible to do. You don't act with impunity. He does, so, I warn you. Anyway, I thought the rest of this was even more interesting. Argentine press reported that it was Felipe Yarura. You remember we just had his last name the other day, Yarura. Felipe Yarura, the Trump family's lead business partner in Argentina, who connected Macri's Foreign Minister, Susana Malcorra, with Donald Trump's son, Eric. Yarura was asked directly if he set up the call, but completely avoided answering. That's a quote. Malcorra also refused to answer in a recent press conference when asked if the businessman served as the conduit between the two governments. So, both people not talking. Eric Trump, both a key player in the president-elect's transition team and the family's real estate empire, told the Argentine government that his father was too busy to talk to Macri and that Trump would reach out when his schedule permitted. That's the sort of thing that maybe you want the State Department handling so that you don't just say, talk to the hand. It wasn't until November 14th that Trump carved out time for the South American leader. They spoke for 15 minutes. Prominent Argentine journalist Jorge Lanata reported that this call included a request from Trump that Macri help him secure the necessary permits to build a long-awaited downtown Buenos Aires Trump Tower. And both Macri and Trump denied the allegation, but as you know, Trump likes to deny things. Yet, Reuters later confirmed that Ivanka Trump, who is also a key player in the family business, and for some reason they leave out also a key player in the transition, was also on the call. And just 3 days after the call, the investment group building the $100 million Trump-branded tower in Buenos Aires announced that they were moving full speed ahead and that they just, quote, Just barely need to take care of a few administrative details, unquote. I think we read the other day that there wasn't even so much as a plan ready to submit at that point. But hey, who's quibbling? U.S. media has largely breezed past the story, but foreign press reports paint a complicated picture of the relationship between the Argentine government, Trump's Argentine real estate partners, and the emerging Trump administration. Those reports lend further support to the existing evidence that Trump and his adult children are leveraging the presidency to advance their business interests. What are we talking about? On election night, Trump's victory reportedly shocked the mogul himself as much as it did the media and most of the nation. Yura, the Argentinian investor working on building a Trump Tower in Buenos Aires, was at his Manhattan victory party that night and told the newspaper La Nación that he had a, quote, very emotional, very intense moment with the new president-elect. How fortunate for him. He added that he breakfasted, I love the verb, with Ivanka, Eric, and Don Jr. the following morning, where they spoke about how Trump's presidency would improve his company's brand worldwide and in Argentina in particular. You see how the planets are aligning? Yura asked. Macri is looking for investment in Argentina, and we are looking to get into foreign products. This is the moment. Trump has been attempting to break into the South American real estate market for many years, and in 2012 made his debut, as they put it, with a coastal tower in Uruguay financed by Argentine investors. The company said at the time that their goal was to, quote, bring the Trump brand to Buenos Aires. It was a difficult goal to accomplish under the leftist government of Cristina Kirchner, who was much more critical of multinational corporations than Macri is. Trump set his sights several years ago on a prime location in Argentina's capital, but as of this September, he had still not gotten the government permits necessary to begin construction. After speaking with Macri, however, the prospects for a Trump Tower in Buenos Aires appear to have improved considerably. They showed confidence that the construction would begin on July 9th of next year, La Nación reported after talking to Yura and Trump's other partners in the venture. Now, the only hurdle for the project is approval from the Buenos Aires city government, whose mayor, Horacio Rodriguez Larreta, is a close ally of Macri's. We knew this. This part is no surprise. But it's all worthy background, an important part of getting around to this section titled Past and Future Conflicts. What kind? Certainly ideological, yes? No? Maybe? Donald Trump and Mauricio Macri have known each other for decades. Not about each other. They've known each other for decades. Interesting. Does anybody have his phone number? I've known him for decades. I don't know how to get in touch with the guy. Really? Okay, there's more. There's more surprising stuff. According to a book written by Macri's father, Franco, Trump, they just come right out with this. There's like no setup to this. I love this. Trump threw a tantrum after losing a round of golf to Mauricio Macri. And remember, there are very few people who can beat him in golf. Mauricio Macri, the guy on the other end of the line in Argentina, just happens to be one of those guys. So Trump threw a tantrum after losing a round of golf to Macri and broke his friend's golf clubs one by one. He just snapped his whole set of golf. How did he sit there and let him do that either? I don't know. Maybe he's angling for a new set of clubs off the guy. What a story. Excuse me, what? The two presidents, not only do they know each other, but once the United States president, the guy with the nuclear button, lost a round of golf to the other guy and was so furious he broke every single one of his golf clubs one by one. Hello? No? Not a story? Okay, well, just move on here. I guess nothing can shock you. So you won't be shocked by this one. In 1979, the elder Macri, Franco, right, tried to buy a majority share in one of Trump's Manhattan real estate projects and ended up losing $30 million when the deal fell through. Now, you would think at that point that Franco Macri has a bad taste in his mouth about Donald Trump, but I don't know. Apparently not. But here you'd think, okay, Donald Trump thinks I got the upper hand on this guy. Here's a little story. When the younger Macri, Mauricio, who's now president of Argentina, was kidnapped. Did you know that? The president of Argentina was once kidnapped. When the younger Macri was kidnapped and held for ransom in 1991, that's not that long ago, his father, Franco, briefly suspected that Donald Trump was the, quote, true intellectual author of the crime. That Donald Trump had his son kidnapped and held for ransom. This is what this guy believes. Nobody was going to bring this up while he was running for president. Well, one of the things, why don't you think Donald Trump is qualified to be president of the United States? Well, there was one time he kidnapped my son and held him for ransom. Although it does say he briefly suspected it. I don't know how briefly. I guess brief enough that, I mean, it's a while that's gone on here. And also, just interesting that the guy tries to buy a stake in a Trump building in 1979. And then, 10, 11, 12 years later, his son gets kidnapped and he's like, it's Trump. I tried to buy a share in his building and I lost money. But for some reason, he's so crazy that 12 years later, he decided I must have got the drop on him. He's going to kidnap. I don't know. Maybe Franco Macri is crazy. Ted Cruz's dad is crazy, so maybe he's crazy too. I don't know. You tell me. Somebody who knows more. Maybe Susan Simpson has more of the goods on that. I just thought, that bears some mention at some point, maybe. Let's say if there was a story in the news about Donald Trump talking to Mauricio Macri on the phone, you could say, oh, hey, here's a funny thing. Did you know that Mauricio Macri's dad thought that Donald Trump kidnapped Mauricio 25 years ago? No? Funny thing. I meant to tell you about that one. It slipped my mind, though, because Hamilton. Macri, the Think Progress piece continues, a right-wing politician with little governing experience who took office last December, openly supported Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election, saying earlier this year, quote, it would be hard to work with someone who would want to build walls, unquote, or who my father suspected of kidnapping me. Maybe. A subtext. His foreign minister, Malcora, remember her, said Trump was, quote, more closed, more isolationist and xenophobic. Prominent Argentinian journalists are now voicing concerns that their government needs to quickly make amends with Trump, saying their only hope is that he was too busy to read up on what the Macri administration said about him. Entirely possible. Spokespersons for both Macri and Donald Trump have thrown cold water on reports that Trump used the diplomatic phone call to push for a permit for his Buenos Aires development. Macri's administration called the allegations absolutely untrue, while Trump's transition spokesman Jason Miller said they were, quote, baseless claims. Yet the participation of Ivanka Trump, as well as the ensuing confident announcements from the tower's developers, raised serious questions about the blurred lines between Trump's international business empire and international relations. Ivanka's presence in a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, raised similar red flags that the family is attempting to use political power to advance their financial interests. The president-elect also sees no such conflict of interest in his complex tangle of business, diplomatic, and family relationships. While campaigning earlier this year, Trump promised to cut ties with his corporation, saying in a debate, I wouldn't ever be involved because I wouldn't care about anything but our country. Anything. Except that was a lie and I'm not going to do it. In a meeting with the New York Times editorial board on Tuesday, however, Trump made a complete reversal. He asserted that there was no problem with mixing his corporate interests with his plans to govern. The law is totally on my side, he said. The president can't have a conflict of interest. Not I can't be seen to have a conflict of interest, but it's not possible. No such thing, if you're president, to have a conflict of interest. That's his view. Trump is correct that the law banning federal employees from participating in matters in which they or their immediate family have a financial interest in the outcome does not apply to the president or vice president. but the Constitution's emoluments clause. And why doesn't it have that? Well, one of the background explanations that I have heard is it does create some tension as between the separation of powers between the branches of government if the judicial branch, for instance, is able to order dissolution or disinvestment from the president's holdings or the vice president's holdings. That is to say, the judicial branch imposing conditions on the executive. And surely the compromise reached during the drafting stage was, well, clearly the emoluments clause of the Constitution still applies, and that can't be a question of separation of powers. If the president violates the emoluments clause, he'd be impeached. And if he was impeached, there's nothing he could do. Yes, the legislative branch does, in fact, have the right to impose its will on the president in cases of impeachment. It's explicit. So they were relying on that, the Constitution's emoluments clause, which bars him from accepting any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. Legal experts told Think Progress that if Macri helps Trump secure the permits for his Buenos Aires project, it could be considered an unconstitutional gift under the emoluments clause. Will anybody care? Will anybody do anything? Will anybody act? Different question entirely, of course. Now, one other item up for bids, if you will, a late-breaking piece that I thought was of some particular interest. Let's see if I can find that one. Did I put that in pocket? Ah, no, here it is. Bloomberg Politics with this one. Just one more. So let's see. They're on the call with the president of Argentina. They're in the meeting with the prime minister of Japan. Now, an interesting little bit here from, I guess, a slightly different angle on things from Bloomberg Politics. Stephanie Baker, also bylined in this one. Ben Brody, Caleb Melby, and Ben Bartenstein. Lucky this time, no Indian or Pakistani surnames to mess me up. But I could advocate for some diversity in your lineup, Bloomberg. I don't know. I'm sure that there are reporters elsewhere. They were just assigned on different pieces. Anyway, just glad I didn't have to struggle with any of those names. Selfish of me, I know. Trump's business partner will be Manila's man in Washington. Not a vanilla man in Washington. They're all going to be vanilla men in Washington. Manila, with an M, capital of the Philippines. Trump's business partner in the Philippines, he's going to be the Philippines man in Washington. How do we mean? Ambassador? Maybe. Check this out. Among the conflict of interest questions swirling around U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's global business interests, Trump Tower at Century City in Manila's financial district stands out. I didn't even know. There's a Trump Tower everywhere, like McDonald's. Century Properties Group Incorporated of Manila, the company behind the $150 million tower that's set to open next year. It's $50 million better than the Buenos Aires one. Paid as much as $5 million to use the Trump name in a licensing agreement that's common for the president-elect. Well, it's common for Donald Trump, who is the president-elect. It's very uncommon to have such a deal for a president-elect, we should note. Trump has at least 10 similar licensing deals around the world, each of which might complicate his administration's international diplomacy, according to ethics specialists. But in Manila, there's an extra connection. Hooray! Century Properties' chief executive and controlling stakeholder, Jose E.B. or A.B. Antonio, was appointed last month to serve as a special government envoy to the U.S. for Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, whose name keeps cropping up with enormously problematic situations all the time. Now, that guy, the Philippine president, who has vowed to expel American troops from his country and ranted against President Barack Obama, Antonio says he sees no conflict between his public role and the private partnership. My role is to enlarge the relationship between the two countries, he said in an interview of his business tie to Trump. He said, I guess it would be an asset. Antonio told Bloomberg News that he visited Trump Tower in New York, in case you were wondering which Trump Tower. This is the one that's filled with the Russian mobsters, Stewie Rah-Rah, etc., where Trump actually lives. He visited Trump Tower in the days after the U.S. election. He didn't speak to the president-elect, Antonio said, but he saw Trump talking with potential appointees. What? Asked about his account, Hope Hicks, a Trump spokeswoman, said they did not meet. Now, okay. One, how did she do it? Two, did she do it? They didn't meet. We didn't have a meeting. I just saw him meeting with other people, which, I mean, was he meeting with potential cabinet level appointees in a room that was to which there was such open access that the special the special government envoy to the U.S. for the president of the Philippines is just hanging out in that room. He's seeing who the president is thinking about making a cabinet secretary before we know. That's odd, but they didn't meet. That's the point. Regardless, Antonio's dual roles as a private business partner and official government envoy underscore the global scale of the potential conflicts facing Trump and his family even before he's sworn in as the 45th president. Questions have been raised in two instances. Trump took a break. They don't put that in bunny ears quotes, and they ought to. You remember that one? The idea that I'm taking a break. If I conduct business in a way that would be illegal, unconstitutional, unseemly for the president to conduct it, you need to remember I was doing that during a break. I'm on my break. Leave me alone. Trump took a break from transition discussions to meet with 3 business partners who are building Trump-branded towers in India, according to media reports, and a spokesman for Argentine President Mauricio Macri on Monday denied a report in La Nación newspaper that Trump had asked for help with permits for a Buenos Aires real estate project during a post-election call with Macri. Trump rejected concerns about his potential conflicts of interest. Prior to the election, it was well known that I have interests in properties all over the world, he posted on Twitter Monday night. Only the crooked media makes this a big deal. On Tuesday, during a meeting with reporters and editors of the New York Times, Trump said, "The law's totally on my side. The president can't have a conflict of interest," according to an account of his remarks that the Times reporters posted to Twitter. Few laws govern how U.S. presidents must conduct their personal business affairs. Presidents are exempt from the 1978 Ethics in Government Act, an exemption crafted out of the belief that presidents shouldn't have to worry about triggering ethics probes when making hard decisions. Interesting way of putting it. Why not? Kellyanne Conway, a top Trump aide, told reporters Monday that while Trump's widespread business interests mean we're in unprecedented times, he's getting advice from various lawyers, accountants, and advisors telling him what he can and can't do. I'm very confident he is not breaking any laws, Conway said. That should be worth nothing, of course, even if she wasn't a habitual liar. The U.S. Constitution bars government officials, including presidents, from taking payments or gifts from foreign governments or profiting from a company tied to a foreign government, but it's unlikely that Trump's arrangement with Antonio would violate that provision, said Robert Kellner, chairman of the election and political law practice at Covington and Burling LLP in Washington. Unless the foreign government was passing funds through that company to Donald Trump, gee whiz, I don't think the emoluments clause would be implicated. It's extremely remote, he said. This is an interesting take on things, but this is where they'll fight. There's nothing illegal about Trump interacting with Antonio as a special envoy to the U.S. on trade and economic policy while also being his business partner. I don't know. But it creates unnecessary complications for U.S. diplomacy, according to Richard Painter, a University of Minnesota law professor who was George W. Bush's chief ethics lawyer. Remember, we heard about him in the last article. Though he had a slightly different take that time, I think. The arrangement means that as president, Trump may have to respond to requests from a business partner who has paid him millions, he said. We have a president in the Philippines who's clearly volatile, Painter said of Duterte. We don't want a situation where the U.S. president is financially involved with a whole bunch of his supporters. That will have an adverse impact on our policy and on our ability to figure out how to deal with Duterte and try to put together our relationship with the Philippines, put back together our relationship with the Philippines. U.S.-Philippines relations have soured since Duterte won the presidency in May, a key U.S. ally in Asia since World War II. The Philippines, under Duterte, sought rapprochement with China and tried to pivot away from the U.S. Now, interesting that he's actually turns out to be a big Trump fan, even though China. Well, I suspect that Donald Trump dislikes China a lot less than he lets on, given that they're a tenant in his building and his lifeline to his financial empire. In an October visit to Beijing, Duterte announced his separation from the U.S. and vowed to resolve his country's dispute with China over the South China Sea through talks and closer commercial links. America has lost, Duterte told a gathering of business leaders in the Great Hall of the People. Earlier that month, Duterte had told Obama to go to hell after U.S. criticism of his war on drugs, which has resulted in more than 3,000 people being killed since he took office. Trump spent much of his campaign promising to counter China's growing economic power, but also railed against U.S. protection of overseas allies in Asia and the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, which was designed in part to stem China's influence. Some analysts have compared Duterte to Trump, a comparison Duterte rejected. He's a bigot. I am not. Duterte was quoted as saying earlier this month. He changed his tone after Trump's victory, saying, "Long live Mr. Trump. We both curse at the slightest reason. We are alike." Wow. Okay. The Trump Organization's interest in the Philippines might do something to smooth relationships between the two countries, said Joshua Kurlansik, senior fellow for Southeast Asia at the Council on Foreign Affairs. Those interests may expand. Antonio said he's discussing additional projects with the Trump family in the Philippine resort and leisure sector. For now, though, Trump and Antonio are partnered in Trump Tower at Century City in Makati, Manila's financial district. At 280 meters, it will be one of the city's tallest structures. Antonio said the tower will open in the second quarter of 2017. It's already sold all of its 250 condo units, he said. Trump has said he'll avoid conflict of interest by having his oldest children, Donald Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, take over the management of his business, but ethics specialists have questioned whether that move would be effective in walling off his private interests from his public duties. It won't. They haven't questioned it. They've said it won't. And his children's involvement in the transition planning has raised further questions about the plan. Antonio said that he visited New York days after Trump's November 8th victory. He said he went to Trump Tower, where he saw the president-elect talking with several cabinet contenders, including Michael Flynn, his eventual choice to become National Security Advisor. While he didn't speak directly to the president-elect during that visit, why was he there? I don't know. Talking to Hope Hicks, talking to the kids? No idea. He did talk with, members of Trump's family, Antonio said. Hicks and Trump's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., did not respond to email requests for comment sent after normal business hours on Monday about discussions with family members. Antonio said he first met Trump in 1990 in New York, introduced by a mutual friend. Of course, because he's friends with everybody. Their children know each other, he said. Antonio's 39-year-old son, Robbie, is listed as a resident of Trump Tower, New York, and is a real estate investor and art collector. There's a lot of art collectors in Trump Tower. A feature in Vanity Fair magazine in 2013 titled The Museum of Me detailed how he commissioned a series of portraits of himself by renowned artists, including Julian Schnabel. Robbie Antonio didn't respond to requests for comment. How about that Trump Tower, eh? Century Properties is known for branding deals with global names, including American socialite Paris Hilton and Versace. It commissioned French designer Philippe Starck to design high-rise developments in Manila. Ivanka Trump markets her jewelry on the company website that promotes the Trump-branded tower. Antonio said he hopes to see one of the Trump children at the opening ceremony for the tower next year. The company may not be immune from softening in the luxury residential real estate market. Vacancies in luxury apartments in the Makati Central Business District rose about 13% in the 3 months ending in September, from 9.8% in the second quarter. Broker Collier International estimates. Century's real estate deals fell to 4.19 billion pesos, that's $84 million, in the 9 months through September, from 6.6 billion a year ago. The decline is attributable to a significant portion of revenue recognized in 2015 and prior years from completed projects, as well as less pre-sales and less new product launches, according to Century Properties. Antonio said owners of the Trump-branded units in Manila are probably very happy Trump won the election and that the skyscraper now bears the name of the incoming U.S. president. He hopes Trump will still make time for him once he takes office. He hasn't made time for you at all. You didn't meet with him, remember? But either way, he expects to remain close to the rest of the family. We interact with everyone. Donald, the kids, he said. I guess he'll be very busy now in his new job. I don't know. He met with the Indian guys. Just saying. Didn't meet with you. I don't know. So just one more to add to the pile. Very interesting. Okay. Nothing to see here. Move on. So here's one rich vein that we could mine for a couple of stories for the rest of the day today, and I'm sure this could carry us into next week as well. But as you all know, everyone's been talking about the fake news issue, both Facebook's inability somehow to be able to detect and weed out what is fake news. This, despite, I saw somebody make a great comment the other day, despite the fact that they have been able to figure out an algorithm to help China weed out real news, they can't figure out how to help America weed out fake news. But I guess I thought I might start with, I don't know, I was going to say, well, it's a more of an overall approach to things, but I wanted to grab the New York Times piece from last week that, let's see, can I even get the original open here and see if I might have to read it in pocket view here. But the story was just the basics, how fake news goes viral. It was a case study, as they put it in the piece here. This goes back to, is this November 10th? I never know what kind of date you're going to get on this pocket view, but at least it has the author correct. Let me see if I can scroll down and get the date. Now, no such luck. So I'm guessing it was last week or so. Author, of course, they're going to throw me another one of the names that I can never make heads or tails of. Sapna Maheshwari, I'm going to guess. That sounds like a pretty decent pronunciation of the name. And how fake news goes viral, a case study. And let's see, we're looking at the story of Eric Tucker, a 35-year-old co-founder of a marketing company in Austin, Texas, who had just about 40 Twitter followers. So this isn't one of the guys, it's not a Macedonian kid, not one of the guys who runs a relatively successful news parody or fake news site, as some would have it. But this is just the case study of one stupid fake news story that the guy didn't even start out with the intention of creating a fake news story. It just kind of happened. So Eric Tucker, just some random dude in Austin, Texas, 40 Twitter followers. But his recent tweet about paid protesters being bussed to demonstrations against President-elect Donald Trump fueled a nationwide conspiracy theory, one that Mr. Trump joined in promoting. You'll recall the other day that we read the interview with the fake news site promoter, essentially, the guy who was making money with his fake news site, who said he just made up a figure, grabbed it out of thin air, and said people were being paid money to protest Trump. And that claim made it all the way to Trump himself. And it's just lingered since then. This guy didn't even make this up. He heard that piece of fake news, and it inspired him to report what became fake news, but was just his not so innocent surmise. This is a really interesting thing. This shows some of the gradations here. We've discussed this in the past, where there's a difference between just lying and making up fake news and just assuming the wrong thing and getting overexcited about something and creating fake news out of it almost accidentally. Mr. Tucker's post, it says, was shared at least 16,000 times on Twitter and more than 350,000 times on Facebook. The problem is that Mr. Tucker got it wrong. There were no such buses packed with paid protesters, but that didn't matter. What did happen? Well, first a little side trip. While some fake news is produced purposefully by teenagers in the Balkans or entrepreneurs in the United States, just what we've been talking about, seeking to, the entrepreneurs, of course, and the teenagers for that matter, seeking to make money from advertising, false information can also arise from misinformed social media posts by regular people that are seized on and spread through a hyperpartisan blogosphere. Here, the New York Times deconstructs how Mr. Tucker's now deleted declaration on Twitter the night after the election turned into a fake news phenomenon. It's an example of how, in an ever-connected world where speed often takes precedence over truth, an observation by a private citizen can quickly become a talking point, even as it is being proved false. And so the story begins. November 9th, shortly after 8 p.m. Eastern, Mr. Eric Tucker here tweeting a couple of pictures he took of buses, just regular, charter buses. But he found an unusual scene, a number of them lined up along a city street in Austin for no apparent reason. And he takes the picture and he notes in his tweet, anti-Trump protesters in Austin today are not as organic as they seem. Here are the buses they came in. And he hashtags it fake protests, hashtag also Trump 2016 and Austin as well. Mr. Tucker, who had taken photos of a large group of buses he saw near downtown Austin, and then went on to misspell the word buses, but okay. He had seen these buses downtown in Austin earlier in the day because he thought it was unusual. That's why he snapped the photos. He saw reports of protests against Mr. Trump in the city and decided the two were connected. He just decided that. He posted 3 of the images with the declaration, anti-Trump protesters in Austin today are not as organic as they seem. Here are the buses they came in. I just read you that a minute ago. Mr. Tucker said he had performed a Google search, because he's a diligent kind of guy, to see if any conferences were being held in the area, but did not find anything. It was a great job he did on the Google search because the buses were, in fact, they write, hired by a company called Tableau Software, which was, in fact, holding a conference that day that drew more than 13,000 people. So his fantastic Google foo, as people call it, it didn't work out. 13,000 person conference, and he just missed it. Anyway, he goes on, it says here, to quote him, he gets himself quoted for the reporters, I did think in the back of my mind there could be other explanations, but it just didn't seem plausible, whereas thousands of paid protesters did seem plausible, I guess. That's what he told the interviewer, noting that he had posted as a private citizen who had a tiny Twitter following. He added, I'm also a very busy businessman, and I don't have time to fact-check everything that I put out there, especially when I don't think it's going out there for wide consumption. First part of that statement, I say, duh. I'm so busy, I don't have time to check everything. But then again, you got 40 Twitter followers. How much harm could I do? What if I'm wrong? Well, you could check on the thing. That might be nice. Anyway, timetable moves forward here. November 10th, 12:49 a.m. Eastern Time. This now several hours later. The first important step occurs. Mr. Tucker's tweet is posted to the main Reddit community for Mr. Trump under the heading, Breaking, all caps, of course, the breaking part. The rest of it properly done. They found the buses. And they spelled the buses right here, too. Dozens lined up just blocks away from the Austin protests. It quickly generated more than 300 comments, some of which blamed the protests on George Soros, the liberal billionaire philanthropist. who is a frequent target of the group. Of course, things moving on here now. November 10th, around 9 a.m. Eastern, the Eastern Seaboard waking up to this news. The next morning, the frenzy began. A user on Free Republic, a conservative discussion forum, linked to the Reddit thread about Mr. Tucker's post, increasing the attention and spreading it further into the online world. Later, Facebook pages like Robertson Family Values, what's that? Well, it's named for but not affiliated with the stars of Duck Dynasty, and also another Facebook page like Donald Trump Commander-in-Chief 2020, which is an unusual name for a Facebook page about a guy running in 2016, but I guess they're already looking forward to his re-election. They both linked to the Free Republic discussion. Those posts were shared more than 5,000 times each, and more than 300,000 Facebook users have linked to the Free Republic thread. Sean Hughes, the director of corporate affairs for the bus company Coach USA North America, said he learned about the rumor involving its vehicles, it was theirs, after receiving a couple of curious emails and hearing from a friend in New Jersey who had seen the claim on Facebook and wanted to know if it was true. I guess that's all it took, but nobody wanted to do that except the guy from New Jersey. Go New Jersey. A reporter at the Fox television station in Austin contacted Mr. Hughes. Wow, Fox. Contacted him later that day, and he responded with a statement noting that at no point were Coach USA buses involved in the Austin protests. But that did little to stem the online furor. F-U-R-O-R. The online furor, of course, was well on his way to rolling over the remaining, I guess, roadblocks between him and dictatorship. But hey, he's a busy guy too. So that reporter said, "You're probably going to get a lot more phone calls because it's all over the place," Mr. Hughes said in an interview on Thursday. That would have been last Thursday. "You're the second journalist to actually call me to see what's going on. No bloggers or anything, and we're easily accessible on our website," Mr. Hughes said. He added, "I just kind of wish people looked into the facts before they go ahead and do something like that because it could be easily debunked based on a quick phone call or two or a couple emails." During this time, Mr. Tucker was replying to queries on Twitter about whether he had proof to support his claim. He confirmed in a post that he, quote, "did not see loading or unloading," unquote, but that the buses were quite near protests at right timing. That admitted lack of evidence, however, had little effect. By about noon, Mr. Tucker's initial post had been retweeted and liked more than 5,000 times, and there was more to come. Yeah, no surprise there. And interestingly, too, his answer is, no, I don't have any proof. His answer is, well, here's some more circumstantial evidence. They were near where I think the protests were, but I didn't see the protests or see anybody getting on or off the buses or anything like that. But buses carry people. People were at protests. That's all you need to know. So, by the evening of November 10th, it has now gotten all the way to Gateway Pundit. Around 6 p.m., the conservative blog Gateway Pundit posted a story using Mr. Tucker's images under the headline, "Figures, anti-Trump protesters were bussed into Austin, #fake protests." The post, which included a mention of Soros money, of course, has been shared on Facebook more than 44,000 times, according to statistics on the website. The storyline became a prominent one throughout the conservative blogosphere, with other sites incorporating Mr. Tucker's tweet into posts about paid protesters, referring to him as an eyewitness in Austin. It's just that his eyes didn't actually witness anything. He did have eyes, and he is something of a witness, just not to anything having to do with the protests. Then, shortly after 9 p.m., Mr. Trump, yes, the actual Mr. Trump, sent this tweet. Mr. Tucker, for some reason, I guess, they don't embed his tweet in the same way. Okay, so I wonder if I can get a hold of that tweet. Okay, so at any rate, Trump at this point, I'm sure, tweets something to the same effect, that they're paying to bus in all these protesters, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. All the rest of the tweets seem to be embedded in my pocket view of this thing, but never mind. Who cares what Trump tweets? It's wrong. Get it? Mr. Tucker at this point, considered deleting the tweet about the buses, but Mr. Trump's message emboldened him. I figured if he were to say something like that, I might be barking up the same tree, Mr. Tucker said. He's a very busy businessman. He doesn't know how to spell buses, and he doesn't know anything about these sorts of metaphors. He might be barking up the same tree. You could be barking up the wrong tree. Maybe you think you're barking up the right tree. It's as long as it's the same tree as Mr. Trump, why, he's a successful businessman. And I'm a very busy businessman myself. So that must be, if not the right tree, at least the same tree. And so I'll be a billionaire shortly. I don't really know what the logic is supposed to be there, but he thinks Trump has independent information about buses in Austin, I guess, because he's an important guy and he has spies everywhere. I don't know. They asked him, when asked if Mr. Trump might have been relying at least tangentially on the erroneous message he had sent about the buses, Mr. Tucker said, I don't want to say why Trump tweeted when he tweeted. Not what, but I don't want to say why Trump tweeted when he tweeted. I just don't know, and I truthfully don't think any of us ever will know. I know. I think you know now. Yeah, there's no reason in the world why Donald Trump would know what was going on with buses lined up on some random corner in Austin. He knows because you told him. You're barking up the same tree, the same wrong, idiotic tree. November 11th, the story continues. Doreen Jarman, spokeswoman for Tableau, that's the software company that was having the actual conference that was using the buses, said the company issued a statement to the local television station KVUE and the Austin American-Statesman on November 11th, saying that the buses were connected to the company's conference. The American-Statesman posted an article online shortly after noon, said Asher Price, the article's author. Around 2 p.m., Mr. Tucker tweeted a link to his blog where he acknowledged that he could have been flat wrong and mentioned that he had voted for Gary Johnson. Well, he's right. He was flat wrong. Not just about the buses, but of course voting for Gary Johnson. But that's supposed to be the excuse. See, I'm not a Trump partisan, even though he tweeted it with the hashtag Trump 2016. I noticed that he didn't include the hashtag Gary Johnson. Anyway, let's see. So, continuing on with the news here. Could have been flat wrong, and don't blame me if I was, because I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for Gary Johnson, but I just thought you'd want the news. The rumor-checking website Snopes also debunked the claim that the buses were connected to any protests. None of this seemed to have much impact. Mr. Tucker's initial tweet continued to generate thousands of shares on Facebook through Free Republic and pages like Right Wing News and Joe the Plumber. Here's the Right Wing News tweet. They take one of his pictures of the buses and put, well. It says, guess who's bussing in all of those anti-Trump protesters who are burning flags and rioting in the streets? Burning flags? Did that actually happen? I don't recall anybody making mention of that one, but hey, who knows? After midnight, Mr. Tucker deleted his original tweet, having caused this firestorm. I was flat wrong. I'll delete it. Then posted an image of it stamped with the word false for posterity. It did not receive much attention. After a week, that message had generated 29 retweets and 27 likes. The Snopes article had been shared about 5,800 times, according to its website, a fraction of the number for the fake version of the news. Faced with the impact of his initial tweet, Mr. Tucker, who now has about 960 Twitter followers, allowed himself a moment of reflection. Anytime you see me in the future going out there where I think there's going to be a big audience, I can assure you I'm going to try my best to be balanced with the facts and be very clear about what is opinion and what is not, Mr. Tucker said. If he could go back, he said, I might still have tweeted it, but very differently. I think it goes without saying I would have tried to make a more objective statement. You have learned your lesson, sir. Oh my. So I would have been more objective about it. Here are some buses. Now I think that they're actually connected to George Soros paying everybody money to bust into Austin to burn flags and be communist to protest Donald J. Trump. I think. But then again, that's just a guess. You see if you can sort it out. All right. Well, thanks a lot. That was real helpful. BuzzFeed had an article on the fake news phenomenon recently, too, and had some interesting statistics and put together an interesting analysis. You can tell it's an interesting analysis because it has the word analysis in the title of the piece, and I take their word for everything. Craig Silverman, whose name is considerably easier to pronounce, but is the BuzzFeed founding editor, Canada. That's what he's BuzzFeed founding editor, Canada. I don't think that states that he is Canada. It's just where he's the founding editor of BuzzFeed Canada. I don't know. That's the only thing I can take out of this. That's an odd construction. Anyway, this analysis, he's in Canada. He can analyze things, right? Brian Monroe knows what's going on. We got plenty of Canadian friends who follow what's going on here. I have no idea what's going on there. That's the nature of our relationship. This analysis shows how fake election news stories outperformed real news on Facebook. I suppose the Canadians are at least as well qualified to comment on our politics as the Macedonians at this point. A BuzzFeed news analysis found that top fake election news stories generated more total engagement on Facebook than top election stories from 19 major news outlets combined. Okay. I am getting text after text in the middle of all of this, of course, because I wanted it quiet. Okay. What does Craig have to say here? In the final 3 months of the U.S. presidential campaign, the top performing fake election news stories on Facebook generated more engagement than the top stories from major news outlets such as, and in case you aren't sure what are major anymore, the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, NBC News, and others. A BuzzFeed news analysis has found. I think they were being humble, keeping themselves out of the mix, but at least in this listing of it. Maybe later on we find out that they include themselves as a major outlet. I don't know. During these critical months of the campaign, 20 top-performing false election stories from hoax sites and hyperpartisan blogs generated 8,711,000 shares, reactions, and comments on Facebook. I don't think I like that metric. Comments on Facebook. I mean, that's hardly even worth counting, but okay. At least that tells you who has seen it and engaged with it, and I guess it's worth something. But I don't know. The way that's phrased, shares, reactions, and comments. What's a reaction even? A like, I guess? They didn't want to say the word like. So 8 million people pushed at least one button after watching this. This is getting to be like those experiments with chickens pecking things to get food. Anyway, within the same time period, the 20 best performing election stories from 19 major news websites generated a total of 7,367,000 shares. So something like 1.5 million less shares, reactions, and comments on Facebook. This analysis focused on the top performing link posts for both groups of publishers and not on total site engagement from Facebook. For details on how we identified and analyzed the content, they're going to tip you off as to their methodology and make it available, and I will make it available to you in our summary post for the day. Up until those last 3 months of the campaign, the top election content from major outlets had easily outpaced that of fake election news on Facebook. Then, as the election drew closer, engagement for fake content on Facebook skyrocketed and surpassed that of the content from major news outlets. And we have a nice little graph here. I did not realize that fake news was underperforming mainstream news by that much. But there's a huge spike, which suggests that there was a huge increase in effort, I would think, unless the argument is America went crazier faster after May to July. Although at that point, I guess Trump becomes nominated, and, that's not a bad proxy for, America went crazier. Of course they did. But there's about, the graph shows fake news getting about 3 million engagements, per month? I don't know what the unit is here, versus 12 million or so for mainstream news. Now that's really interesting. The fact that mainstream engagements would decline so rapidly. And then, of course, I guess I'm not terribly surprised that fake news engagement spikes so rapidly. That's the excitement of the campaign and the excitement of finding hyper-partisan news that agrees with your viewpoint. But I don't really understand why mainstream media consumption would fall off so much, except that there's only 24 hours in the day and you can only read so much. But it's about 12 million engagements for the top 20 stories in mainstream news in the period of February through April, and 3 million for the fake news. And it remains about 3 million through the end of July, though mainstream news by the May to July period has dipped to about 9 million, but they're still running 6 million engagements ahead of the fake news. But by the period of August through Election Day, we look at not only a huge spike in fake news and a big dip for mainstream news, but a total reversal to where we're getting to 8.7 million engagements for the fake stuff, 7.3 million engagements for the real stuff. Very weird. I'm troubled that Facebook is doing so little to combat fake news, said Brendan Nyhan. Yeah, he's been kind of perturbed by a lot of this. A professor of political science at Dartmouth College who researches political misinformation and fact-checking. Even if they did not swing the election, the evidence is clear that bogus stories have incredible reach on the network. Facebook should be fighting misinformation, not amplifying it. A Facebook spokesman told BuzzFeed News that the top stories don't reflect overall engagement on the platform. There's a long tail of stories on Facebook, the spokesman said. It may seem like the top stories get a lot of traction, but they represent a tiny fraction of the total. He also said that native video, live content, and image posts from major news outlets saw significant engagement on Facebook. Of the 20 top-performing false election stories identified in the analysis, all but 3 were overtly pro-Donald Trump or anti-Hillary Clinton. 2 of the biggest false hits were a story claiming Clinton sold weapons to ISIS and a hoax claiming the Pope endorsed Trump, which the site removed after publication of this article. The only viral false stories during the final 3 months that were arguably against Trump's interests were a false quote from Mike Pence about Michelle Obama, a false report that Ireland was accepting American, quote, refugees fleeing Trump, and a hoax claiming RuPaul said he was groped by Trump. Which, all right, I wrote that one. That's not funny. Yeah, so let's see. Oh, here's a little graphic with the top 5. We already heard the one about the Pope. Although these are the headlines you might be interested in. We can also, interestingly, a couple of them come from the same sites. A site called Ending the Fed. Gee whiz, where did that one start out? That'd be a Paul family creation. Had 1, 2, 3 of the top 5. How do you like that? There's a trustworthy site for you. Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement. That little boring releases statement part at the end is supposed to make it sound, I guess, more real. Also, this one says, it's over. Hillary's ISIS email just leaked, and it's worse than anyone could have imagined. I guess that's the one about her selling weapons to ISIS. And then, just read the law. Hillary is disqualified from holding any federal office. That one also from Ending the Fed. The other ones come from the Political Insider. Has one here. WikiLeaks confirms, it says in all caps, Hillary sold weapons to ISIS. Then drops another bombshell. Breaking news. I don't know what the bombshell was. And then the Denver Guardian was the one. Yeah, that one came up a couple days ago. That's the one about FBI agents suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Amazing. Okay. We also have here the top 5 mainstream election stories by Facebook engagement, I guess, during the same period, this being 3 months before the election. The top performer here came in at about 849,000 engagements. The top performer, that was the Pope Francis one of the fake stuff, 960,000 engagements. Top performer among true stuff, I guess. Trump's history of corruption is mind-boggling, so why is Clinton supposedly the corrupt one? From Washington Post. Then next up, stop pretending you don't know why people hate Hillary Clinton, says the Huffington Post. Melania Trump's girl-on-girl photos from racy shoot revealed. That one, the New York Post. Ford fact-checks Trump. We will be here forever. That was the story about... That's funny that was one of the leading shares of real news 3 months before the election, considering how much attention the fake version of it, which claimed the opposite, how much attention that got post-election. Just the other day, when Donald Trump announced that he had convinced Ford not to move to Mexico, and we had that story parsed, I think. They were never planning on moving the plant to Mexico, but some of the work that was done at the plant might have been done at a different plant that would be in Mexico, but they had no intention of closing this one. And they said a million times along the way, no, we're not moving to Mexico. And then when they said finally, guess what, we're still not moving to Mexico, Donald Trump said, aha, I've convinced them not to move to Mexico. And then the last of the top 5 engagement stories. I ran the CIA. Now I'm endorsing Hillary Clinton, a piece in the New York Times. So there you go. They got the last place. They lost to the New York Post on that one. All right. So the data, it says this new data illustrates the power of fake election news on Facebook and comes as the social network deals with criticism that it allowed false content to run rampant during the 2016 presidential campaign. Mark Zuckerberg said recently it was, quote, a pretty crazy idea, unquote, to suggest that fake news on Facebook helped sway the election. He later published a post saying, we have already launched work enabling our community to flag hoaxes and fake news, and there is much more we can do here. Actually, it just says more. Maybe it's not much more. It's a little more. This week, BuzzFeed News reported that a group of Facebook employees have formed a task force to tackle the issue, with one saying that fake news ran wild on our platform during the entire campaign season. The Wall Street Journal also reported that Google would begin barring fake news websites from its AdSense advertising program. That's probably the more effective of the two moves. Facebook soon followed suit. These developments follow a study by BuzzFeed News that revealed hyperpartisan Facebook pages and their websites were publishing false or misleading content at an alarming rate and generating significant Facebook engagement in the process. The same was true for more than 100 U.S. politics websites BuzzFeed News found being run out of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. This new analysis of election content found 2 false election stories from a Macedonian site, or from Macedonian sites, that made the top 10 list in terms of Facebook engagement in the final 3 months. Conservative State published a story that falsely quoted Hillary Clinton as saying, I would like to see more people like Donald Trump run for office. They're honest and can't be bought. The story generated over 481,000 engagements on Facebook. A second false story from Macedonia falsely claimed that Clinton was about to be indicted. It received 149,000 engagements on Facebook. All the false news stories identified in BuzzFeed News' analysis came from either fake news websites that only publish hoaxes or from hyperpartisan websites that present themselves as publishing real news. The research turned up only one viral false election story from a hyperpartisan left-wing website. The story from Winning Democrats claimed Ireland was accepting anti-Trump refugees from the U.S. It received over 810,000 Facebook engagements and was debunked by an Irish publication. There was also one post from an LGBTQ site that used false quote from Trump in its headline. The other false viral election stories from hyperpartisan sites came from right-wing publishers, according to the analysis. One example is the remarkably successful, utterly untrustworthy site Ending the Fed. It was responsible for 4 of the top 10 false election stories identified in the analysis. We saw 3 of the top 5 before. There was the Pope one, the Clinton selling weapons to ISIS, Clinton being disqualified from holding federal office, FBI director receiving millions from the Clinton Foundation was the number 4 one of that group. The 4 stories racked up a total of just under 3 million Facebook engagements in the 3 months leading up to Election Day. Ending the Fed gained notoriety in August when Facebook promoted its story about Megyn Kelly being fired by Fox News as the top trending item. Of course, she wasn't fired by Fox News. Anyway, the strong engagement the site has seen on Facebook may help explain how one of its stories was featured in the trending box. The site, which does not publicly list an owner or editor, did not respond to a request for comment from BuzzFeed News. Like several other hyper-partisan right-wing sites that scored big Facebook hits this election season, Ending the Fed is a relatively new website. The domain endingthefed.com was registered only in March, yet, according to BuzzFeed News analysis, its top election content received more Facebook engagement than stories from the Washington Post and New York Times. For example, the top 4 election stories from the Post generated roughly 2,774,000 Facebook engagements, nearly 180,000 fewer than Ending the Fed was able to get for its top 4 false posts. A look at Ending the Fed's traffic chart from Alexa also gives an indication of the massive growth it experienced as the election drew close. And there's nothing I can tell you except their traffic skyrockets. It explodes. It's about, what is this? Is this per day? I don't know how Alexa hits per what. Anyway, it's got about 1,000 hits a day in April, just before the beginning of April of 2016. Chart ends, I guess, entering November, over 10,000. I don't know if it's per day or what. Anyway, you'll see the chart for yourself. Certainly the shape of the chart gives you the story you need to know. A similar spike occurred for Conservative State. That's the site that was only registered in September. Was that the Macedonian one? It saw a remarkable spike in traffic almost instantly. It starts in September and goes from, 600? It goes, wow. How does this chart work? I can't even tell you what's going on. I think they got the numbers backwards in this thing. Yeah, I think, you'll see for yourself. It looks like the numbers on the y-axis are running backwards. So it's what we're talking about on the Alexa for Ending the Fed was going from about 10,000 or so hits a day to over 1 million. And likewise over at Conservative State, going from 0 and then exploding past the 650,000 mark inside of a month. Alexa estimates that nearly 30% of Conservative State's traffic comes from Facebook, with 10% coming from Google. Along with unreliable hyperpartisan blogs, fake news sites also received a big election traffic bump in line with their Facebook success. The Burrard Street Journal scored nearly 380,000 Facebook engagements for a fake story about Obama, saying he will not leave office if Trump is elected. That's a good story, but it's fake. It was published in September, right around the time Alexa notched a noticeable uptick in its traffic. That site was only registered in April of this year. Its publisher disputes the idea that its content is aimed at misleading readers. By the way, what was it called? The Burrard Street Journal. I guess in their answer to BuzzFeed News, he refers to it as the BS Journal. You tell me what's going on here. The BS Journal is satire news and makes absolutely no secret of that or any attempt to purposely mislead our readers, he told BuzzFeed News. Large news sites also generated strong Facebook engagement for their links to their election stories, but to truly find the biggest election hits from these 19 major sites, it's necessary to go back to early 2016. The 3 biggest election hits for these outlets came back in February, led by a contributor post on the Huffington Post's blog about Donald Trump that received 2.2 million engagements on Facebook. The top performing election news story on Facebook for the 19 outlets analyzed was also published that month by CBS News. It generated an impressive 1.7 million shares, engagements, and comments. Overall, a significant number of the top performing posts on Facebook from major outlets were opinion pieces rather than news stories. The biggest mainstream hit in the 3 months prior to the election came from the Washington Post and had 876,000 engagements, yet somehow Ending the Fed, a site launched just months earlier with no history on Facebook and likely a very small group of people running it, managed to get more engagement for a false story during the same period. People know there are concerned employees who are seeing something here which they consider a big problem, a Facebook manager told BuzzFeed News this week, and it doesn't feel like the people making the decisions are taking the concerns seriously. So there's an additional section down here on their methodology, which I'll leave for you to review on your own if you are interested, and it's well worth a look. But I wanted to get to one or two more other weird fake news stories or stories about fake news that I thought, well, you might find kind of interesting. You remember the other day, Wednesday, I mentioned to you that I saw a flyby on Twitter. The sign for, as what they were calling it on Twitter, was the sign for Comet Ping Pong, which they went on to describe as a pizza place. And I was puzzled by that because I haven't heard this viral fake news story. I can't figure that out. Maybe this story will help me with it. But I had noted what was interesting about it was that the Comet Ping Pong / pizza / wait till you get a load of this story place was sporting the old sign from the old Comet Liquors store on Columbia Road in Adams Morgan, which I think closed about 10 plus years ago, even though I hadn't been there in even longer. But it's long gone, and most of the people writing today for the political publications or even covering politics for the major publications have no functional memory of Comet Liquors ever existing on Columbia Road, so made me feel nice and old. Anyway, the New York Times has this piece that I had already set aside, not realizing that it was about this place. So let's take a look at this one. Fake news onslaught targets pizzeria as nest of child trafficking. Nest of child trafficking, really? And then it all began to come together about how many times I had seen the accusation passed around among right-wing wackos and idiots that, don't you know that Hillary Clinton ran a child trafficking business inside Washington, D.C., and you're so ridiculous that you don't face up to the truth. And I was just like, they were just trying to pull the dumbest thing possible out of their hat. This is the genesis of the story. Cecilia Kang is the author of this piece. And hell, let's get right to it. Days before the presidential election, James Alefantis, Alefantis, James Alefantis, owner of a local pizza restaurant called Comet Ping Pong, I don't know why, I guess they also play ping pong there, noticed an unusual spike in the numbers of his Instagram followers. Within hours, menacing messages like, "We're on to you," began appearing in his Instagram feed. In the ensuing days, hundreds of death threats. One read, quote, "I will kill you personally," unquote, started arriving via texts, Facebook, and Twitter. All of them alleged something that made Mr. Alefantis' jaw drop. That Comet Ping Pong was the home base of a child abuse ring led by Hillary Clinton and her campaign chief, John Podesta. What? When Mr. Alefantis discovered that his employees were getting similar abusive messages, he looked online to unravel the accusations. He found dozens of made-up articles about Mrs. Clinton kidnapping, molesting, and trafficking children in the restaurant's back rooms. Why she would need the pizza places? I don't know. Somebody got a bad pizza there, so they did it. The articles appeared on Facebook and on websites such as The New Nationalist, The Vigilant Citizen, and The Vigilant Citizen, with one headline blaring, "Pizzagate. how 4chan, that'll give you an idea of how this happened, uncovered the sick world of Washington's occult elite. Wow. None of it was true. While Mr. Elefantis had some prominent Democratic friends in Washington and was a supporter of Mrs. Clinton, he has never met her, does not sell or abuse children, for the record, and is not being investigated by law enforcement for any of these claims. He and his 40 employees had unwittingly become real people caught in the middle of a storm of fake news. This is insane. And from this insane fabricated theory, we've come under constant assault, said Mr. Elefantis, 42, in case you were wondering how old he was. Oh, well, yeah, he probably wouldn't be trafficking children in a pizza restaurant for Hillary Clinton if he's 42. I don't know. This is when they decided to insert that little bit of news. Anyway, he was once in a relationship with David Brock, a provocative former right-wing journalist who became an outspoken advocate for Mrs. Clinton. I guess we're talking about Media Matters' David Brock. Right, okay. Mr. Elefantis suspects those relationships may have helped to make him a target. I've done nothing for days but try to clean this up and protect my staff and friends from being terrorized. Fake news online has been at the center of a furious debate for the past 5 weeks over how it may have influenced voters in the presidential election. President Obama warned last week that we are, quote, in an age where where there's so much active misinformation, and it's packaged very well on social media sites. The criticism has buffeted web companies such as Google and Facebook, whose chief executive Mark Zuckerberg has promised to work on technology tools to slow the gusher of false digital information. But Mr. Elefantis' experience shows it is not just politicians and internet companies that are grappling with the fake news fallout. He, his staff, and friends have become a new kind of private citizen bullseye for the purveyors of false articles and their believers. For more than 2 weeks, they have struggled to deal with the abuse of social media comments and to protect photos of their own children, which were used in the false articles as evidence that the pizza restaurant was running a pedophilia ring. One person even visited Comet Ping Pong to investigate the allegations for himself, and I guess that's actually almost a good thing, except that who knows what they did when they were there. To combat the fake news tide, Mr. Elefantis has contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local police and has asked that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit remove the articles. Yet the misinformation has continued to spread, growing into a theory known as #Pizzagate that has traveled to Ireland. At one point, Comet staff counted 5 Pizzagate Twitter posts a minute. As recently as Sunday night, the Twitter message, "Don't let up, #Pizzagate everywhere," was reposted and liked hundreds of times. It's like trying to shoot a swarm of bees with one gun. When did that become a metaphor? Said Bryce Ray, R-E-H, Comet's general manager, whose wife asked him to leave his job because of the threats and vulgar messages that they both have received on their social media accounts. Mr. Elefantis, an artist born and raised in Washington, co-founded Comet Ping Pong 10 years ago as a casual spot for clay oven pizza. Enormous demand for clay oven pizza. Okay. The restaurant has kid-friendly features like ping pong tables and a craft room. Famous natives like members of the band Fugazi have held small shows there. The eatery, which seats 120, is a mashup of red and white checkered tablecloths and modernist murals and paintings from friends of Mr. Elefantis. Mr. Elefantis mingles with other Washington chefs. I don't know if he can be pizza chef. Sure, why not? And his establishment helped him to be named number 49 in GQ magazine's 50 most powerful people in Washington in 2012. I would say that was probably a mistake. But okay, the number 49 in GQ's 50 most powerful people is the guy who's got a clay pizza place that some other people who are in politics like to go to. Well, that is a little weird, and that would only feed conspiracy theories, I'm sure. Anyway, his customers include some high-powered locals, such as Tony Podesta, the brother of John Podesta, whom Mr. Elefantis knows casually. Mr. Elefantis and Mr. Brock, who is the the founder, there's no co about it, of Media Matters for America, a website that tracks press coverage critical of the Clintons and, well, even before then, although I guess ostensibly that was the original reason, and it's why not everyone loves them to death. But yes, Media Matters, I think you all know what they're about. Also works to debunk misinformation in general in the conservative press. Elefantis and Brock broke up 5 years ago, and yet, whatever, let's keep targeting the guy. The misinformation campaign began when John Podesta's email account was hacked. How did that happen? And his emails were published by WikiLeaks during the presidential campaign. Days before the election, users on the online message board 4chan, which, remember, is one of the original founts, I guess you might say, of what became later the alt-right, and we do have to discuss that situation. We'll push that one off for Monday, I guess. The 4chan users immediately speculated about the links. I'm sorry, I almost missed the end of this sentence. The days before the election, 4chan users noticed that one of Mr. Podesta's leaked emails contained communications with Mr. Elefantis discussing a fundraiser for Mrs. Clinton. The 4chan users immediately speculated about the links between Comet Ping Pong and the Democratic Party. Some posited the restaurant was part of a larger Democratic child trafficking ring. Why? I'd love to know why. I think let's make as much trouble for them as possible, but okay. Anyway, that was a theory long held by some conservative blogs that there was such a ring. That idea jumped to other social media services such as Twitter and Reddit, where it gained momentum on the page the _Donald, if you want to find the actual page. A new Reddit discussion thread called Pizzagate quickly attracted 20,000 subscribers. Glenn Kaplan, former campaign official for Mrs. Clinton, did not comment directly about Comet Ping Pong, but said, WikiLeaks has spawned several conspiracy theories that have been independently debunked. Mr. Podesta did not respond to requests for comment. Soon, dozens of fake news articles on sites such as Facebook, Planet Free Will, and Living Resistance emerged. Readers shared the stories in Saudi Arabia and on Turkish and other foreign language sites. Last week, one supporter of the Pizzagate theory shot a live video from within the restaurant during a busy dinner shift. Local police, who had parked across the street after Mr. Elefantis filed a report about the fake news stories and threats, told the man to leave. In a statement, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department said it was monitoring the situation and is, quote, aware of general threats being made against this establishment. The FBI says it does not confirm or deny the existence of investigations. Most troubling for Mr. Elefantis and his staff has been the use of children's images pilfered from the restaurant's social media pages and the personal accounts of friends who had liked Comet Ping Pong online. Those photos have been used across dozens of websites. Parents who declined to talk publicly for fear of retribution have hired lawyers to get the photos removed. Musicians who have performed at Comet Ping Pong have been pulled in too. Amanda Kleinman, whose band Heavy Breathing has performed there several times, deleted her Twitter account after the abusive comments became overwhelming. Similar comments have flooded her YouTube music clips. We're at a dangerous place in American culture where a good percentage of people who aren't distinguishing what's a real news source based on real reporting and fact-checking, and only reinforcing pre-existing ideas they have, Ms. Kleinman said. The frustration has been compounded by the lack of recourse for Mr. Elefantis, his friends and employees. Yelp blocked the comment section of Comet Ping Pong's review page after reports of abusive comments and fake news in reviews. YouTube said it prohibits threats, harassments, and hate speech and has tools for flagging violations and filing complaints for the site to take further action, but largely has done nothing in the way of blocking comments on those videos. Twitter declined to comment. Facebook didn't have any comment. After employees and Mr. Elefantis complained to Reddit about how Comet Ping Pong was being targeted at the site, the Pizzagate discussion thread posted a warning that revealing personal information about individuals was prohibited. We know that we have more work to do, and we take our responsibility to address online abuse seriously, Reddit said in a statement. Little relief appears in sight. Over the weekend, Comet Ping Pong received dozens of calls from people screaming obscenities and threats. Mr. Elefantis got 50 nasty Instagram direct messages, including one that warned this place should be burned to the ground. On Monday morning, when Mr. Elefantis picked up his phone, he saw a text from a staff member warning that an individual might protest in front of the restaurant. It is endless, he said. And there is, at least, if I recall, one further piece. Reddit did, in fact, eventually close down the subreddit dedicated to harassing Comet Ping Pong. This one in dcist.com, and it's the one that is illustrated with the picture of the old comet sign. So I can include that for you to get a good look at what that was about. By the way, that one had even one of the more ridiculous little stupid connections that I guess only conspiracy theorists can see. This one actually, at the time, had me laugh out loud, but you won't hear that now because it's already been spoiled, the joke for me. WikiLeaks release of hacked emails from Hillary Clinton campaign chair John Podesta has ensnared one unlikely victim, Comet Ping Pong, the Chevy Chase pizzeria. I didn't realize it was in Chevy Chase. By the way, credit where due here. This piece for the DC is written by Rachel Kurzius, I'm going to guess, Kurzius. Anyway, here's the weird part. Conspiracy theorists on sites like Reddit, 4chan, and Twitter began claiming incredulously that the popular restaurant and concert venue is at the center of a child sex trafficking ring for elite politicians shortly before the election. The dubious evidence includes the fact, this is nuts, that owner James Alefantis' name kinda looks like the French phrase "Jamais les enfants," which translates to "I love children." Like that's a fake name. James Alefantis, kinda sorta, if you split it up differently and spell it differently, looks like "Jamais les enfants." Forget my French. I got nothing for you here. You'll have to see it for yourself. Those of you who speak French are either laughing or vomiting at the moment. I'm not sure which. Anyway, that plus, of course, that the word pizza, which is what they sell there, is allegedly a code word for something far more nefarious in the Podesta emails as Vote user, V-O-A-T. That's, I guess, one of the weirdo websites that was into this thing. One user, Somnium9, wrote, "The pieces of the puzzle are in the pizza." I do not even know what that is supposed to mean. But basically they convinced themselves, hey, that guy's name sort of looks like French for "I love children." And although they only speak about selling pizza, it must be that pizza is code for child sex ring. That's what's driving politics in America. And now Donald Trump is your president. Isn't that great? What a fantastic story. I'm so glad I learned that about my fellow human beings. I'm extraordinarily disappointed. So that'll wrap things up for another episode of Kagro in the Morning here, ending our Thanksgiving week. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you every day this week, but, like most of you, just spent a little bit of time recentering and spending time with family, and luckily we didn't have any Trump arguments at our dinner. Hope you had the same good fortune. I appreciate your letting us take a break here and again, and wanted to sort of repay your loyalty with a recorded program of all new stuff so that you could keep yourselves company, keep yourselves sane until we meet again on Monday when Greg returns to the lineup. And yeah, we'll have to have a make good both for Joan McCarter, who will join us for our Wednesday program as usual, and get back in the swing of things with Josie Duffy Rice on Fridays as well. Plenty more to bring you about the alt-right and exactly what it may or may not be, and some alternative theories about A, where they came from, and B, what we ought to do about them. I know there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the question of whether or not we ought even to be using the terminology, but as always, we've found a nice piece that will bring you some nuance on that question, and I'll be pleased to share that with you next week. Unless, of course, it's all displaced by more craziness happening over the weekend. Cross your fingers. We'll see you on Monday. Thanks for listening.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks again by sticking by us, and do stay tuned for the rest of the programming day here. I am assuming they're going to put together an after show. Always a great place to stay tuned with and figure out what other stories has David left out here after rambling for 20 minutes or so on each one of these little things. Stay tuned to find out.